Welcome once again, everyone, to Mary's School of Prophecy. I am your host, William Tapley, also known as the Third Eagle of the Apocalypse and the co-prophet of these end times. And this is part of my enjoyable work, and that is decoding true prophecy. And I do believe that Dana Coverstone is giving us true end times prophecy. It is not what I would call positive, because he is warning us, just like all true prophets. Although he is quite popular, and I think that's because most people don't understand what he is saying. I certainly don't think Sherry Goff knows, and she is the one who usually interprets his prophecies. But I did not watch her interpretation of his newest one. All she said is that it was a judgment on America, and that I agree with her 100%. So let me start with my slides. I see everybody's doing their comments already. This is fine. I think, Tina, you'll have to stop the chat while I am doing my, well, maybe you could leave it on. Maybe you could leave it on. I'll tell you what, Tina, leave the, I guess I don't see Sandra Lavini here. So I think, Tina, it looks like you're going to do you can leave the chat on during the prophecy and during the prophecy decode, and only take out a troll if they're being obnoxious, and even then you don't have to delete them. Just delete the comment, okay? So now let me start the program. I like to start a little. Well, it's only 3 minutes. I usually like to give people about 5 minutes to get on board. We've only got 31 viewers. Well, people are skipping class tonight. They're playing hooky. In any event, so Dana's newest dream is called the sewer rat dream. I think that's what he calls it. And it's a continuation of a series of dreams that he had about Joe Biden and the Biden presidency, and the last of which I think he received on March 10th. In this new series of dreams, although he calls it one dream, I can see 3 or 4 dreams, and he has compiled them into one dream, and he should. And these series of dreams started March 18th, I believe, and they ended April 2nd. So what I will do is review the last dream that he received. He received 4 dreams in his Biden sequence. So I thought I would review the 4th one, seeing as how this new dream, the sewer rat dream, is a continuation of that dream. And as you know, I like to read the entire dream. And maybe not all of you have watched Dana Coverstone when he actually gave the dream. So that's why I like to review it all. I mean, some people may think this is redundant, but there may be people who have not actually seen his dream. So in this case, let's start with the dream that he received before. And I think this particular one, the 4th dream in the Biden series, he received March 10th. So let's put that on the screen. And then earlier in the week, this was March 10th, the elevator door opened, and the man that I see often in my dreams was wearing a very expensive looking suit. He walked out from that elevator to the Oval Office, and he stood behind the Resolute desk. He suddenly grabbed that desk and upturned it and pushed it toward the front of the room. It ended up upside down with 2 of the drawers out and papers flying in the air towards the ground. I think when we see this man, who appears in, I think, all of Dana Coverstone's dreams, they always represent Almighty God, maybe sometimes an angel. In this case, I think the man is Jesus himself. And this overturning of the desk, to me, reminded me very much when Jesus overturned the money changers. And I think that was the key to understanding who the man is in this dream. And that's kind of interesting that, why didn't Dana Coverstone say it's Jesus? Well, that's because he did not appear as Jesus. And it's not unusual, even in end times Bible prophecy, in the Bible, for Jesus to appear as something other than himself. For example, in the book of Revelation, John describes him as a lamb. I think everyone knows that the lamb is Jesus. He's also described as a rider on a white horse. And he's shown with like brass feet and a sword in his mouth and woolly hair. But we understand that even though it's not, John does not say that this is Jesus, neither does Dana Coverstone say that this man is Jesus. But I think that's who we are talking about. Okay, and let's continue with the Biden dream, his previous Biden dream. This also revealed a blood stain, a large red blood stain under the desk, and the front of where the president's chair sat as well. And then the man spoke and he said, "Don't let the suit fool you, or the office either. What's under the desk will eventually be seen. And the blood spilled as of late, is worse than at the beginning. Stay braced, for the winds are picking up according to my command. And the stakes have never been higher for your country or for your church." So now I think it's interesting here that the man, as I say, is Jesus. And he says the stakes are very high. But this prophecy seems to be a contradiction to the data dream. Remember the data dream prophecy? And where the casket is lying in the rotunda. And inside is not Biden, by the way, is the corruption of Biden. And the sergeant at arms says that Biden's corruption will not be revealed now or forever. And there's one senator that's very upset at that, and he makes a mad dash to the White House because he knows that the order came from the White House. Now, I believe it was Donald Trump who gave that order, so to speak, in the prophecy. And that has come true. The data, all of the aspects of the data dream has come true. But here, the man, who, as I say, I believe is Jesus, says that what's under the desk will eventually be seen. And I'm sure that this blood represents the crimes of both Biden and Roberts, as I said in my previous analysis. And I believe that Biden and Roberts, as I said in my previous interpretation, are on the road to hell. I believe that is what the message is here. But we now see that in this dream, it's kind of interesting what's going to happen to this blood. And it's interesting that he says that the winds will be picking up. Is that what that in this previous one? Yeah, stay braced, for the winds are picking up according to my command. I think that's a reference to the four winds in the book of Revelation. And the four winds in that book are told not to cause any destruction until the 144,000 Israelites are sealed, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. So what we are going to find is this revelation of the crimes of Biden and Roberts and many others, the rats, as we will see. This evidently takes place, I would say, before the winds, which will precede again the sealing of the children of Israel, the remnant. Okay, let's look at the next part of the previous dream, the last part. And then he stepped over the upside down desk, leaving the room. And as he did, the desk seemingly faded, almost like it just disappeared. Almost like the disintegration you would have seen in Star Trek when they were being beamed up or beamed down. They just kind of dematerialized. The desk simply faded into nothing, and the blood stains glowed red, almost like they got thicker. They glowed red, and all of a sudden they burned a hole through the ground and just left a hole in the carpet with the red edges around it. That's when I woke up. As I say, that was the conclusion of the previous Biden dream. And as I said, I believe that that glowing red blood and the hole in the floor indicated that Biden and Roberts, because remember there were two bloodstains, are on the road to hell. So now let's take a look at the beginning of the sewer rat dream, which is a continuation of the previous dream. The rats in the sewer. Now, as I say, he received this on between March 18 and April 2nd. I was standing in the White House Oval Office, and the blood under the desk from the previous dream was now dripping from the carpet edges where it had seemingly burned through the floor underneath, and there was smoke associated with it. And the blood was descending along with the carpet and the wood area type thing. And it kept going. It was getting thicker and seemed to be alive. The blood was moving, and there was a lightning blazing within it as it burned through the floor. So now we see quite a bit interesting development. So this blood is very active. I believe it indicates the corruption of Biden and Roberts and all of the Washington establishment. And it's very similar to the snake chain dream. Remember the snake chain dream where there was blood at the roots of all the trees? Well, the trees represented the major prominent people in the deep state in Washington. And the trees and the blood at the roots indicated that the foundation for the deep state, the major actors in the deep state, was bloodshed. And of course, we know what that refers to. That refers to abortion. And that is the primary element of Biden's party. Roberts is supposedly a Republican, and he was, I believe, put on by Bush, I believe. That, of course, that doesn't mean anything. I'm sure he's a rhino. So this kind of, this blood verifies the snake chain dream that bloodshed is at the heart of the deep state. Okay, let's look at the next slide, the next part of this dream. So it kept going, floor to floor to floor to floor to floor. And finally, it went through the floors to the granite below, until I found myself in a rounded and equipped tunnel about 30 feet wide. And it seemed like it ran for miles in either direction. So it had gone from the Oval Office floor, down through the floors of the White House, through the granite, through the floors, and finally ends up in a tunnel that obviously ran underneath the White House. So I think we've all heard about the tunnels in Washington. In this case, I'm not sure that this is a real tunnel. I'm sure this is symbolic, but there are real tunnels also under the Capitol. I think I've seen the... I'm not sure if I've ridden on the, I think I have ridden on the shuttle under the Capitol that runs from, I believe I took it from near the Immaculate Conception over to the Capitol. I vaguely remember that, probably at one of the Marches for Life. So I know there is a subway under, and I think that's probably what it's talking about. It's also probably talking about a DUM, which is a... deep underground military base. And as the man said in the previous dream, that this bloodshed, this is getting worse. It's not getting better. Okay, let's look at the next part of the dream. There were auxiliary lights and very bright lighting on the walls running along and down the corridor. There were also tunnels leading off in other directions at intersections in both directions as well. There also seemed to be a channel on the ground, wide enough for 2 vehicles to drive by. So at the very bottom of the tunnel, there was this channel, wide enough for 2 vehicles to drive by each other there. And I think this is pretty obviously a description of a deep underground military base, or the acronym is DUM. And I think that's what Dana is talking about here. I think, who is that guy that does decodes of the DUMs? Charlie Decode or something, or I forget his name. Anyway, he has an interesting program. He says these DUMs are all over the country. I suspect this DUM probably symbolizes the DUMs all over the country. Let's look at the next verse. Suddenly the blood from the Oval Office came through the ceiling, and it began filling the channel where the cars would have driven. So the blood is entering from the ceiling and came all the way from the Oval Office, and now it's pouring into this tunnel with the channels on the ground. There were signs with distances to various Capitol locations on the wall, all around the tunnel's doors, about every half mile, and they had key button pads to get through. So I think it's kind of interesting that this blood coming down through from the Oval Office will eventually expose, as we will see, the rats in a few minutes. But these revelations start at the Oval Office. Will Biden be the first one? Will his criminality be the first one to be exposed? But it starts in the Oval Office, and that could very well refer to previous presidents who were responsible for building these domes. Okay, let's look at the next slide that I've got here, the next part of the dream. And also, on the sides of those rounded tunnels, there were walkways, about 5 to 7 feet wide, that people would have walked on. But these walkways now were filled with rats. And these rats seemed to be glowing, almost pulsating. And they were running in every direction. Some were even trying to climb those smooth concrete walls. The blood was getting higher. It seemed to be boiling. The smoke was filling the airspace between the ceiling and the blood rising. So this is obviously symbolism. I mean, I'm sure these rats are politicians. I think you can call them rats. I think it shows their corruption. That's why they're glowing. These are symbolic rats, not real rats. I'm sure the blood is symbolic also. And it's interesting is, when is this all going to happen? This is one of the very few dreams in which Dana Coverstone does not give a timestamp. Remember the snake chain dream, for example? There was a very definite timestamp for the start of that. That was where the snakes went out and enslaved the states. And the specific timestamp for that dream was cherry blossom time, the time we are in right now. But I don't see, I think that this is going to take place almost simultaneously with the snake chains. So I think all of his other dreams have been imminent. So that's why I will say it's imminent, even though he does not give a timestamp. But who knows? Maybe this won't start for another year, 2 years. Who knows? So let's look at the next part of the dream. The rats were soon barely getting enough air above the blood, and they were climbing on top of each other in sheer panic to get out. And then the lights in the room, those auxiliary lights, began flashing, and the blood kept rising, and suddenly an emergency siren went off. And at this, the rats began to chatter and bite, and they appeared to be screaming as if they were fighting each other, like in desperation. So they were in sheer panic. So isn't this typical? When the criminals, they don't have, what is it? There's no honor among thieves. Well, they start fighting each other, and that's what these rats are going to do. They're going to start tattling on everybody else. They all know what's been going on, and I think that's what we. It's hard to believe that this is going to happen because with the election of JB, I don't think that this was in anybody's mind that the swamp creatures were going to be exposed. But I think that's what we're going to see here. It's kind of interesting that this is much different than what we are getting right now. Is this really going to happen? Are the swamp rats, are they really going to be finally exposed? I think this is amazing if it's true. And Dana Coverstone's previous dreams have been coming true, like the data dream. Okay, the next part. The blood kept rising until it filled the entire corridor, and then it began to foam. The blood at the top began to foam, and I could see the rats with their faces against the roof, and there were some rats that were floating dead within that current of blood, because the blood was moving and flowing down those tunnels. And all at once there was a flash of light, and the blood just pushed in each direction until it was only about as high as the walkway. almost like doors or gates had been opened, and the blood just rushed on through. The next slide. And I was already seeing light and air from outside at this point, and realized the blood had pushed itself through every manhole and was coming up in the buildings, the basements of buildings, and the first floors of buildings in that area. At this time, I'm standing on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House, and the rats were running everywhere. And as those rats ran their tracks, they were tracking blood everywhere they went, through the grass, in the streets, on the sidewalks. And next slide. And I could see that every major building had tracks in and out. The rats had gone in, the rats had gone out. The Supreme Court building, the Treasury, the Smithsonian, the National Mall were all covered. And I mean covered in those tracks. And the rats were still entering buildings and monuments alike. There was a huge number of rats. It was just ongoing. They were just coming from everywhere. Now, this is really amazing. Dana Coverstone is prophesying that these swamp rats are going to be exposed. They're going to be caught. And this is, in a way, a contradiction to the data dream, where, remember, the Sergeant at Arms said that Biden's corruption would never be exposed. But remember, that was the Sergeant of Arms. Was he giving a biased interpretation? Was that wishful thinking on his part? In this case, it's the man who was Jesus who was giving this dream. And I think that this is very possible that that these rats will be exposed. And in a way, it indicates that people like Simon Parks and X22 and Charlie Ward and Mark Taylor, they may not be right about Donald Trump coming back, but it does look as if they could very well be right that the plan, remember, we were supposed to trust the plan. It could well be that the plan will be carried out with or without Donald Trump. This is really a fascinating dream that Dana Coverstone has received. And the next part of the dream. People then appeared with cameras, and they had the large press flash bulbs that you would have seen with reporters in the 1920s to the 1950s, maybe. Large press-like flash bulbs, and they were taking pictures of every single set of tracks. And it seemed that each track was being followed by reporters who took pictures, and then they made notes in little journalist notebooks. And with each flash bulb going off, the rats appeared to age, and soon the gray hair was white hair. Well, now, isn't this fascinating? Is Dana Coverstone saying that the media are going to start behaving like real media? That's what this prophecy is saying. That's why he said they looked like the reporters from the 1920s to the 1950s. That was back when we had real media. That's when the journalists were actually investigating. They would look into things. That's not happening now. The media is giving everything, all the deep state a whitewash. Dana Coverstone is saying that's going to change. It's interesting that, for example, he says the reporters are taking notes. Well, they don't do that now. They follow whatever they're told to say. In this case, they're doing investigative reports. They're even taking photographs of the tracks. This is really quite an interesting dream that Dana, and as I say, I think this is going to be, we're going to see this come true very shortly. The swamp creatures, according to this, they are not going to sleep easy if they believe Dana Coverstone's dream, and I think his dream is correct. Okay, let's look at the next part of the dream. And they seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. They were laying on their sides and dying, and a lot of them were covered in blood. They had blood on their feet. I could just tell they were aging and getting older, becoming more elderly-like, so to speak, in that regard. The footprints of the rats started glowing until they became three-dimensional and thick. And then these same tracks caught on fire. And they went out quickly, but they left this smoking track, almost like a smoking gun idea. So I think it's pretty clear what's happening here. It's very much like the data dream. I think it was pretty clear that the evidence was going to prove, in the data dream, was going to prove what the election was all about. And that all came true, very much as he prophesied. It also came true that Biden was elected. And I told you at the time, I told you that the people in the rotunda not having shoes on, that meant respect for Biden, as if he had won, which he did. And I told you at the time that when the Sergeant of Arms said that the corruption of Biden would not be exposed now or forever, that was a decision by Donald Trump, and I believe it was. The plan was to expose all of this deep state. I think the plan is now going to go into effect, with or without Donald Trump. Now, the next part of this dream is really interesting, because we are now going to be introduced to a giant. I've never seen any prophecy with a giant in it. So let's take a look at this next part of the dream. And then I saw a giant walking towards the Washington, D.C. area, who was standing, way just bigger, much taller even than the Washington Monument. As this giant walked, he grabbed the top of the Washington Monument like a lid, and he lifted it up. And as he lifted it up, the ground around the primary area of Washington, D.C. came up with it. And everything was still there in one piece. And it kind of reminded me, if you've watched the Marvel movies, of Marvel, the Age of Ultron, when the city of Sokovia has the vibranium at the bottom of the city, and the city is rising, and you see dirt and dust and stuff coming off of it. Well, I suspect that Dana Coverstone, as a father, has taken his kids to seeing Marvel. I had to look all this stuff up. I mean, I had no idea what. And this movie that he's talking about here, this Age of Ultron or something, it cost the studio over $300 million to make the movie, but it was a good investment. The movie made $1.4 billion. This is based on a comic book. And so it's not surprising now, to me, now that I realize, that God would use a giant to get people's attentions. Americans understand this. Oh, a giant. This is not like, let's say, the book of Revelation, where there's a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. That's understandable to Bible students, but not to Americans. But if you say a giant, maybe this is the Hulk. Is that his name? The Hulk or something? Then Americans wake up. And Dana Coverstone tells us that this is like the Marvel comics. Now, there were giants in the Bible called the Nephilim, and they were evil. But this giant, I think, is carrying out God's will. So I don't think it's a Nephilim giant. Besides, those were not nearly as big. This is a mythical giant. This is much taller than. This is a giant that's big enough to lift up the whole city of Washington. And it's in it now. Here's the question I have, and I'll let you think about this. Now, I mentioned the Scarlet Beast. Could this giant represent the Scarlet Beast? In other words, God did not say, and a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns lifted up the Washington Monument. He said a giant did, which reminds people of Marvel Comics. Is this the Scarlet Beast that is going to upturn Washington, D.C.? Because that's in the Bible. On the other hand, does this giant represent Donald Trump? Many of the prophets on YouTube, like Mark Taylor, and I mentioned X22 and all those guys, they all say that Donald Trump is going to uproot Washington and expose the deep state. And we already have the man symbolizing Jesus. Why couldn't the giant represent Donald Trump? So that's what we're going to have to decide here. Is this a good guy? Does this giant represent Donald Trump, or does it represent the Scarlet Beast in the book of Revelation? Okay, let's look at the next part. Continue with this amazing dream from Dana Coverstone. This was kind of a fun dream to work on, and I think it's true. It's kind of scary, And when you see what's going to happen to Washington. Well, that was what was happening. And the whole city is being grabbed by the Washington Monument and being lifted up. And so the whole city of Washington is just kind of up in the air. And this giant is catching onto it. And then, after he pulled the entire thing up in one hand, he placed the city into a large sifter, a sifting tool like you would sift flour. And he held them in the other hand, and then taking both hands, and he literally took that sifter and he began to shake it. I don't think it's any accident that he picks up Washington by the Washington Monument. I think this is a judgment on probably the Masonic underpinnings of the city of Washington. Everyone knows that obelisks are favorites of the Illuminati and the Masons. And this destruction of Washington, D.C., as I say, is this the destruction caused by Donald Trump exposing the deep state, or is it the destruction caused by the Scarlet Beast, as prophesied in the book of Revelation? Does this describe World War III, in other words? Is this like the goat versus the ram in Daniel 8? The goat in Daniel 8 represents the Scarlet Beast, the same entity. The ram, one of the horns on the ram, represents the United States. Could it be the war described as the last king of the South against the last king of the North? All of these are references to World War III. I'm hoping that it's Donald Trump, but it may not be. Let's look at the next slide, the next part of the dream. He took the sifter, and the parts of the city and the ground began to break up, and the buildings were shaking violently, and the parts falling through the sifter were falling back into the hole from which it had been pulled out. And it was just people falling out. It was debris falling out. It was filling up with the grounds. And after a few minutes, and it seemed like it shook forever, but after a few minutes of shaking and sifting, the only remaining things were the federal buildings that were linked to D.C. and the historical precedent that came with it. Well, that historical precedent is kind of interesting. So this destruction of D.C., I believe, indicates the destruction of the Democratic Republic that we have. You know, that's why the historical precedent. So in a way, this is a good thing. This is destroying the bloody rats and so on, and the city of Washington. But are we going to be happy when we see who is going to do this? I'm hoping it's Donald Trump. All right, let's look at the next part of the dream. And then holding the sifter in his left hand, he reached into the sifter with his right hand, and he grabbed those remaining buildings. He just crushed them, just squeezed. You could see the muscles and the blood vessels popping on his hand as he just squeezed, and was literally just crushing them in his hand. And he held it so much until his hand began to shake, and was literally shaking as he held it. And then he opened his hand, and there was nothing but crushed debris in his hand. And the next slide. And he just literally put his mouth down and blew it. And the debris became like fading smoke. That debris didn't end up on the ground. It disappeared like fading smoke in the air and was gone. Have you ever seen flash paper? As a children's pastor, I used to use flash paper quite a bit. You'd light it, and it just disappears. Well, this wasn't like flash paper. It was just dust that became smoke and then just disappeared. And then he placed the sifter on top of the hole below, and there was still that large indentation on the ground. So this destruction of Washington, D.C. is obviously total and complete. There's nothing left except dust. So, as I say, is this World War III that causes this, as prophesied in the Bible? Or is this Donald Trump destroying the deep state? Let's look at the next part of this dream, which I have here. If I can find it, just a minute. And then the man that I always see in the dreams, he approached me, and he had a scale in his hands, the kind that you would weigh produce on, kind of holding it. You have two different things. You can tell the weight, and on that scale was a bowl. And in that bowl was currencies of the world. The yen, the ruble, the US dollar. I saw the euro. I saw many different types of currencies. And he held the scale high above his head. And then he threw the scales to the ground. And when it hit the ground, it powdered. And the wind blew that into the air as well. But the bowl was still in his left hand. So, as I said before, this man represents Jesus. However, I don't think the bowl in this case represents the bowl judgments in Revelation. That's the first thing I thought of. The bowl judgments are just about all plagues of various kinds. This has to do with the economies of the world. But this is much different than what the giant was doing. This is the man who's doing it. This is Jesus doing it. This is completely different. This is, I believe, Armageddon, what Dana Coverstone sees here. Because at Armageddon, all of the nations of the world, all the tribes, as Jesus says, are destroyed. This is not like World War III. World War III begins the tribulation, but Armageddon ends the tribulation. And the key here is all the currencies. When Jesus returns and sets up his millennial kingdom, there will be no financial system other than what he establishes in the world. So Dana Coverstone has gone through 3 major events in this dream. He's gone through the exposure of all the criminal rats in Washington, number 1. We've seen the destruction of Washington, D.C. That would be, I believe, part of World War II. And the third is Armageddon. So we've gone through, and we don't, as I say, there's no time stamp on this dream. So Dana Coverstone is not giving us a time for any of these to occur. And let me see, I got one more. I've got to finish this now. Here's what the man says at the end. This is his summary of the dream. And he said these words, I determine the value of what is valued. I determine the value of what is valued. But the soul of the nation worships paper, and paper is all it will be. And then he said these words, the time of bracing is past, and the season of endurance is upon the body of Christ. Endure now, endure tomorrow, and endure until the end. Unfortunately, I think that's the key to understanding of who the giant is. If the giant were Donald Trump, we would not have to endure. We would be on the sidelines cheering, which is what we heard from, who was it? The QAnon, and all of the prophets on YouTube who were saying that we always enjoy the show. Remember, we were told that. I don't think this is going to be enjoying the show. We're going to endure. That's what Dana Coverstone is prophesying. The destruction of Washington, D.C., in other words, is World War III. The giant represents the beast. And why shouldn't the giant represent a beast? He only uses the term giant because that's what Americans know. We like fantasy figures like that, Marvel Comics. And so, in a way, the conclusion is positive. We will see being destroyed, what should be destroyed. We will see at the end that God destroys the one world communist tyranny. And this lines up with all of Dana Coverstone's previous dreams. It's very similar. In the mud dream, remember, there's a river of mud, and we have to endure in there because we can't take the masks that the people on the side are offering us. In fact, mocking us because we don't take it. The mask stands for the mark of the beast. We can't take the mark of the beast. We have to endure. It's like the snake chain dream, where the snake goes out and enslaves the various states. This is consistent. with all of his dreams, except, as I say, for the deep state, where the sergeant of arms says Biden's corruption would not be revealed. According to this, the media will begin to expose all the criminal rats in Washington. And actually, that's not inconsistent either. The communists would go after each other because it's going to be a winnowing out process. Who is going to be the leader in Washington, or who is going to lead the country, I should say? Because the rats are as Dana Coverstone said here, they start fighting against each other. So I think that the overall dream is positive. In other words, the rats are going to be exposed. The deep state is going to be broken. The Washington Monument, the Masonic underpinnings of our country will be destroyed. And then God destroys all nations of the earth, and all of this is right in the Bible. So Dana Coverstone's prophecy is verifying what we already know, really, except he's putting it in terms that maybe Americans will wake up and understand what's going on. Now, I would like to add one little footnote. This is all dependent on the woman and when the woman travails and brings forth. Now, that could change the prophecy. Dana Coverstone does not cover the woman who is, we know, Mary. In Micah, Donald Trump is finally able to destroy the deep state after the woman who travails. Let me get it right. The woman who travails brings forth. And Micah chapter 5, verse number 3. Dana Coverstone does not cover that. We can always pray that is the solution. But according to what Dana Coverstone is prophesying here, we have to endure. And it's positive, but at the same time, it's going to require sacrifice and pain and mourning on our part. All right, that is the end of Dana Coverstone's dream, and that is the end of my interpretation. So I would be interested in what you have to say, and I think for about 15 minutes, I don't like to go over an hour, we can see what everyone else is discussing, and I hope some of you discussed the dream. Tina Sizzle says, trolls are not welcome. Tina, I think you're getting into the spirit of being a moderator here. Sayaku says, God bless all. Joyce Adcock is here. Joyce says, hello to everyone. I lost my driver's license and turned everything upside down. Prayed to St. Anthony. Well, that's what you have to do. In a New York second, it was found deep in the slot of my purse. St. Anthony finds everything. My nephew says there's only one thing St. Anthony will not find, and that is lost golf balls. At least that was his experience. And same with fishing lures. I can give you the experience of that. If you're going to go out fishing, you may not. Although I have found lost fishing lures too, so. Okay, Uncle Jalapeno says, looking forward to Mr. Tapley's interpretation. Well, how was it, Uncle? Do you think you agree with me? Tina Sislo, Sayaku, let's see. Joyce Adcock. Jerry G says, present, Professor T. I did not take attendance, but I'm glad you were here, Jerry. I used to remember I did these programs, Mary's School of Prophecy. There's been no drop frames, so you should not have any buffering on this program. Larry Tischler is here. Joyce Adcock again. God bless Mr. T for doing this interpretation. I enjoy doing the interpretation, but I have to do a lot of thinking about it, trying to figure out what all the symbolism is. And I know you're not going to get that interpretation anywhere else. I'd be surprised. Let me know if you do, if you hear anyone else talk about the identity of the giant, for example. I mean, how many dreams have giants in them that shake Washington like that? Very interesting dream, really. Sayaka says, when you said, Mr. William, everything in the past came true, I don't get why he doesn't know this. I mean, that man, see you respond of his dream. I think Data Coverstone, I hope he sees that everything is coming true. The data dream came true, just like you have to look at my interpretation. I'm not sure everybody interpreted it. The Biden in the casket did not refer to the Biden that he was dead. It referred to that his inside is corrupt. That's what that was. It was symbolic. I said at the time that's what it was. Okay, let's see. Tina Sislo says, Sayaku, Dana himself said that he doesn't read any decode except that of his friend, period. And he gets about 300. I saw the 300 decodes per dream. Well, then he doesn't understand his dreams, because I don't. And I did not watch, what's her name's interpretation this time. Except where she said it represented judgment on Sherry Goff. That's her name. Except she said it represented judgment on America. And I think that's true. That part is 100%. Let's see, Sayaku says, Tina, sadly, he is not Catholic. No, he's evangelical. So it's harder to accept what William is saying, especially Our Lady saving us. But I pray for him to know the truth soon. This is true. You know, I'm always a little question about any Protestant prophet like this, because even if the Lord told him, if Mary appeared to him, he wouldn't know what to do. He would say, this is false. This is from the devil. And their whole interpretation is skewed by except Mary has appeared to Protestants. She appeared to George Washington. George Washington received a prophecy about these times we are in right now. And he said America will go through a horrible catastrophe. And the red cloud will come over America. And of course, in other words, he saw communism coming to this country. I know a friend of mine, I shouldn't say a friend, an acquaintance. I met him, a Baptist, who received a locution from Mary. It's very interesting. He had a business. I think I've told you this before. He owned a store, and it was failing. He was going downhill, and he became more and more concerned. And one night he was closing up, and he was really depressed because he realized he couldn't last much longer. And he heard Mary's voice, and he knew it was Mary. He tells everybody it was Mary who told him what to do, and she gave him precise instructions how to save his business. And he did what she said, and he saved his business. I don't know why he didn't become a Catholic. But anyway, it shows that Mary has never given me a locution. In fact, most Catholics probably have never gotten a locution. But there she is. She saved a Baptist business. Let's see. Zachariah says, so that is why I think he can't be a co-prophet. As William said today, he needs to unseal before he reveals, and Dana doesn't fully have the full gospel like we do. Yeah, I agree, Sayaku. Dana Coverstone is a true prophet. He's getting true prophecy, but he's not a co-prophet. And he's been trying to decode Jeremiah 23, and he doesn't have a clue. He doesn't realize that you have to unseal the prophecy. And I've done several playlists on Jeremiah. The most recent one I think is the best, because I put it all into one. If you want to understand Jeremiah 23, Dana has no understanding that Wormwood is the false prophet. I don't blame him. That's not his calling. He doesn't have a calling to be a co-prophet. And he doesn't get many views of his co-prophecy videos. He gets quite a few views of his prophecy videos, and that's because they are true. Tina says, but he is receiving the dream, so let's continue listening. Yes, Dana does receive true prophecy, I believe. I don't believe that other guy, Tim, is that his name? I don't think he's getting true prophecy, but I could be wrong. I haven't really studied him. Let's see. Joyce Atkins says, Sayaku, this was revealed to me the other day. From generation to generation, they will call me blessed. Who are they? Followers of Jesus. If you don't recognize the Holy Mother, you missed the boat. Well, as Kim Clement said, they will say, before we hated her, but now we love her. Sayaku says, Joyce, I agree. And then she's got 100 there. So where does this 100 come from? Sayaku, that's pretty good. CB says, have you noticed that the Protestants have started talking about the 3 days of darkness and the schism in the Catholic Church? It seems they are getting prophecy later than Catholics. I know, but the 3 days of darkness, I mean, there's a certain, people want to talk about it, but it's not something, comes at the very end, the 3 days of darkness. Really, to be concerned about that, you should be, if you want to be concerned about something, be concerned about Israel. In the Middle East, this is where World War III starts, and Israel is in dire straits. And if you read the Jerusalem Post at all, if you are Debka files or anywhere, you'd see what's going on over there. It's not pretty. I'm telling you, Daniel 9 has not been fulfilled yet. Some of it has been. This is really what's amazing. The part where the Anointed One confirms the covenant, that has already occurred. That's what Donald Trump with his Abrahamic Accord, he was bringing peace in the Middle East. Of course, Satan and the deep state were petrified that he was going to bring peace. It's the last thing. The Antichrist does not want peace. The second part of Daniel 9 has come true, and that is where the Anointed One is cut off. Well, Donald Trump lost the election. Well, actually, he won it, but he's been removed from office. He was cut off, but not for himself, just as Daniel 9 says. And what's next in Daniel for Israel? What's next is that the prince who shall come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and that's the abomination of desolation for the Jews. That'll be the third abomination of desolation. The first abomination of desolation for Protestants has already occurred, and that means they have to be ready for the rapture at any time. The second abomination of desolation has occurred, and that's when the false prophet takes the daily sacrifice away from the prince and invalidates the Eucharist. That has already occurred. So the third abomination of desolation affects the nation of Israel. And that is about to occur. Okay, the 3 days of darkness were only given to Catholic visionaries, according to Tina. People are now beginning to check all prophecies. Yeah, right. Well, this is true. I mean, I shouldn't complain that they're talking about the 3 days of darkness, but as I say, there's a lot of other things that are going to come before that. Let's see, Joyce says, CB, they are always second to the truth. They try but can't come to the accurate knowledge of prophecy. They need to recognize their Holy Mother. Yeah, this is the big blind spot they have. But in the Catholic Church too, Genesis 3:15 has been totally falsely interpreted in the Catholic Church. EWTN. I say this every morning on my rosary. That reminds me, for those of you who never prayed with us, pray the rosary on this channel. We pray it every morning at 10 a.m. Let me see. Let's see. Tina says, when I watched Dana, originally I thought the giant was St. Michael the Archangel. Well, that's a good thing. I thought of that too. He would be a giant like that. Let's see. Sayaka talks about Mangus comics from Japan. I suppose they must have comics over there too. There's a story of giants. It's called Attack of the Titans, which was very popular over here, which involves giants. Oh, okay. I'm not up to date on that. It's interesting to me that just about all these games that kids play involve destruction of cities. The whole thing is going through. I've never seen one in which you're not going through a ruin of a city. Sahiku says, all I can say is that comic is brutal because everyone dies by the Titans, the giants. Tina says the Pietà Rosary just finished the last day of the Novena of Divine Mercy, by the way. That's true. Tomorrow is the Divine Mercy Sunday. Sandra says this is scary. Well, it is scary. JMJ says, judge me, O God, and distinguish my cause from the nation which is not holy. Deliver me from the unjust and deceitful man. Uproot DC. The monolith is Masonic symbolism. All true. JMJ says that's the global currency reset. Well, yeah. I've been hearing about Nessera Jessera, for years now, JMJ. That's wishful thinking. I don't think that's the reset. It says Iraq is to start very, very soon. I don't think that's their global reset. But we'll see. We'll find out. I suspect. Well, it'll be interesting to see if that's true, JMJ. I hadn't thought of that, but I should have known you would mention that. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what the currencies are all changing. But that would mean that it's that Jesus is in charge of the global currency reset. Let's see, Maria Ponadori. Boot Resources is here. Boots, I haven't heard from you in a long time. He's from Nigeria. Boots Resources is here with you guys, always with WFRN. I salute you, Dr. Tapley. Okay, thanks, Boot. JMJ says, amen. Tina Alma Madrano is here. Boot Resources again. Tina says, hi, Alma. How was the pavement today? Tina, Alma, were you out there again? Alma is really a true soldier of the Lord. She counsels girls who are going into the killing centers. A very depressing job if there ever was one. And Tina says, we keep you in our prayers constantly, and we should. We should pray for Alma. That's one of the most dangerous jobs. Those demons would like nothing better than to stop Alma. Okay, everybody, we're way over time. I'd like to stop before the hour is up. Fox Slayer says, our idol is failing. The money is worthless, and it's going to get more and more worthless. I told you this morning about my brother buying two studs, 2x4x8, paid $9.50 for each one. I couldn't believe it. Well, this is what you get when you get a communist economy. We're going to be another Venezuela. That's what they want. Pirate Heart says, I was just thinking if DC is nuked. If so, is the giant from Russia? Well, that's what I think, yes. The Scarlet Beast is international communism in the book of Revelation. The horn on the goat in Daniel 8 is Russia. So, and it destroys the two horns on the ram, which represent Britain and America. And of course, this coincides with what Mary said at Fatima, that Russia would spread her errors throughout the world. Several entire nations would be annihilated. Let me see here. Someone says they got buffering. Jerry G, I will have to listen again. Had storms here and so much buffering. I missed it on. Okay, so that's not at my end. There's no buffering as far as this from my channel, from my computer. There's no dropped frames. Sandra says, yes, the 3 days of darkness is a Catholic prophecy. Yes, it is, but it's, as I say, there's a lot of things we should be investigating before then. And as I say, we should really be concerned about what's the abomination of desolation as it affects Israel, because that's the third one that will come along, and that's next. Okay, everybody, I'm going to let you finish all the chat, which is always interesting. Don't forget, if you want to pray a live stream rosary tonight, you can join Sam Fisher on his Piata Rosary channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's less than an hour from now. At 9:30, Kyle on his Rosary WMD channel, he prays a live stream rosary. Believe me, we are doing more than all of the false prophets all over YouTube, and there are many, many of them. And at 11:30, Scott Fox on his Mary's Battle Beast channel also prays a live stream rosary. And Jesus said, wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there will I be also. So you can pray with them, or you can join me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on this channel. We will be doing a live stream rosary also. So until I do see all of you again the next time, may God bless all of you, and may all of you have a very blessed evening.